Nina had only been working at the mansion for 2 days. The corridors were so long and confusing, all marble and echoing silence, that she often got lost even with the map her supervisor had given her. That afternoon, she was told to clean the guest room on the 3rd floor, the one with the blue curtains. But as she pushed open the heavy mahogany door, she realized, too late, that she had made a mistake. There, inside the spacious suite, surrounded by marble columns and golden light pouring in through the windows, was the billionaire himself, soaked in a bathtub. His head was tilted back, eyes closed, water dripping from his thick lashes. She froze instantly, mouth open, but her limbs were locked. He opened his eyes slowly, piercing gaze landing on her, and then, he smirked. "You opened the wrong door," he said, voice like velvet. Nina immediately began to stammer apologies, backing away with her head bowed. But he lifted a finger. "No need to leave in such a hurry," he said, with a strange calmness. "Stay a while. I haven't had a real conversation in days." And with that, the door behind her closed with a soft click. Nina stood stiffly by the door, her heart racing. Every training they'd received had emphasized never enter the master's suite. It was the one untouchable space in the mansion. But here she was, standing in front of the man who owned everything around her, and he wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. If anything, he seemed intrigued. He reached over the edge of the tub and grabbed a towel, rising from the water without shame. Nina quickly looked away, face burning. "You're new, right?" he asked, wrapping the towel around his waist and walking toward the minibar. She nodded without making eye contact, expecting to be fired. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nina," she whispered. "Nina," he repeated, tasting the word. "You've got curious eyes." "I like that." He poured himself a glass of something golden and leaned against the counter. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the chair near the fireplace. "I don't bite. Unless you ask me to." She flinched at the joke, unsure if he was serious, but sat down anyway, heart thumping so loud she could barely think. Just as she was about to excuse herself, hoping she could slide out of the room without causing further trouble, she heard it. A second click at the door. She turned slowly. It was locked, from the inside. Her stomach twisted. "Sir, I should really leave," she said softly. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "I said stay, didn't I?" he said, walking closer, glass in hand. "Why is everyone always in a rush to leave me? I open a door, and they run." His voice was calm but laced with something else. Hurt? Bitterness? Whatever it was, Nina sensed it ran deep. She tried to stand, but he shook his head. "I'm not going to harm you. I just want company." Nina stayed frozen. The power dynamic was too real. He was in charge of everything here, including her paycheck. But then something shifted. He sat across from her and began to talk. About meaningless things at first, the rain, the silence in the mansion, how people only saw him for his wealth. As he spoke, she noticed how tired he looked beneath all the luxury. The next day, Nina expected to be dismissed, or at least scolded. But instead, she was summoned, by name, back to the same suite. The other maids looked at her with confusion, some with jealousy. "He asked for you," her supervisor whispered, eyebrows raised. Nina could hardly believe it. Why would a man like him want anything to do with a maid? She walked into the suite again, this time with permission, and he was already waiting. Dressed in a dark robe, barefoot, sipping something warm. I was beginning to think you'd run, he said with a smirk. I almost did, she confessed. Why did you ask for me? He studied her for a moment before answering. Because you didn't look at me like the others do. You didn't pretend. They began talking again, this time more openly. He told her to sit. She did. Hours passed. And then it became a routine. Each evening, she would visit the master's suite and talk. No one knew what happened behind the locked doors. But slowly, the invisible contract between them grew deeper and more dangerous. It was a cold night when she reached for the teacup he had handed her, and their fingers brushed. She froze. So did he. The air between them thickened like mist. She quickly looked away, but he didn't move his hand. You're trembling, he said, his voice suddenly gentler. I'm not used to being alone with a man like you, she admitted. He took the cup from her and set it aside. And what kind of man am I? He asked, stepping closer. Nina didn't answer. She didn't have to. The room was heavy with unspoken things. He raised his hand to her cheek, brushing a strand of hair away. You could walk out now, he whispered. Or you could stay and see where this leads. Every nerve in her body screamed to run, but her feet wouldn't move. Not because she was scared, but because, deep down, she didn't want to. Not yet. He leaned in closer, breath warm on her skin, but didn't kiss her. Instead, he walked past her and opened the balcony. Fresh air, he said. You look like you need it. The mansion buzzed quietly with whispers. Other maids had started noticing Nina's late returns. Her eyes a little brighter, her step a little more cautious. Are you seeing him? One asked, half joking. Nina denied everything. But the rumors grew. Some said she was being seduced. Others believed she had something on him. She wanted to distance herself, but every time she tried to avoid his suite, he would summon her. And she would go. Something unexplainable pulled her to him. Maybe it was how he listened when she spoke, or how his walls fell only around her. But part of her also feared what it was turning into. One night, she asked him directly. Why me? He leaned back in his chair, watching her with an unreadable expression. Because when you walked in that day, you saw me, he said. Not the billionaire. Not the owner. Just me. That's rare. She wanted to say it was a mistake. But she couldn't. Nina walked into the suite one evening and found a new dress laid out on the bed, simple, elegant, and completely unlike anything she owned. It's not a bribe, he said from the balcony when he saw her hesitate. I just thought you might want to feel different tonight. She didn't know whether to feel insulted or flattered. I'm a maid, she reminded him, touching the fabric with trembling fingers. That doesn't mean you're not allowed to be more, he replied. Slowly, she changed into the dress in the bathroom, heart pounding. When she stepped out, he looked up from his glass and froze. Now you're dangerous, he murmured, half to himself. That night, he didn't ask her to sit across the room. He asked her to sit beside him. And she did. Their conversation was slower, more intimate, as if words now mattered less than presence. When she got up to leave, he didn't stop her. But his eyes lingered, and his silence followed her all the way back to her tiny maid's quarters. The head housekeeper, Madame Rena, cornered Nina by the stairwell. You think he's the first master who played with a maid's heart, she said coldly. Don't be foolish. They always return to their kind. Nina didn't answer, but the words sank into her like ice. She wanted to believe he was different. That she was different. When she arrived in his suite that night, she was distant. He noticed instantly. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing," she lied. He walked closer, took her chin gently in his hand. "Someone said something," he guessed. "Don't let them steal what we're building here." She wanted to ask what they were building, but she was too afraid of the answer. He poured her a drink, then poured one for himself. "I never asked for any of this life, you know," he confessed. "The money, the house, none of it brought peace." She looked into his eyes and saw something broken. And suddenly, her fear melted. Not because she was sure of him, but because, for the first time in her life, someone saw her too. A storm rolled in late that night, thunder rattling the mansion's windows. Nina stayed longer than usual, watching the rain blur the glass. He sat beside her on the floor, both of them barefoot, both of them quiet. "I used to be afraid of thunder," she whispered. "Still am," he said, surprising her. They laughed, and it was the kind of laughter that softened the soul. He told her about the time he ran away from a boarding school as a boy, soaked in the rain, determined to return home. She told him about her mother, who died scrubbing floors in a hotel. And somewhere between the stories, she stopped feeling like a maid. The clock chimed midnight. "I should go," she said, rising. But as she reached for the door, he stood and touched her wrist. "Do you really want to?" he asked. She didn't. Not one bit. But she stepped outside anyway. And as the door closed behind her, she leaned against it, eyes wet, unsure if it was the rain or something deeper. The next evening, when she reached his door, it was already unlocked. A quiet invitation. She stepped in and found him staring at a piano she'd never noticed before. "Do you play?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. But I listen." He gestured for her to sit. She did, and he watched her as if she were the music. They didn't talk much that night. Instead, they let silence become its own language. When she rose to leave, he didn't speak. But just before she touched the doorknob, she noticed it, there was no lock anymore. The knob turned freely. She glanced back at him, and he gave a soft nod. "You're free to go anytime. But I hope you stay." That night, in her room, she stared at the ceiling for hours. What did it mean to be wanted, but not owned? To be chosen, not bought? Whatever it was, it frightened her more than anything. A week passed. Every night she returned to him, and every morning she returned to scrubbing floors, washing sheets, and pretending nothing had changed. But it had. She laughed more easily now. He smiled more often. Even the staff noticed he wasn't as moody, though they had no idea why. One morning, she saw her name scratched faintly into the corner of a book on his shelf. When she questioned him, he only smiled. "I keep traces of people I care about," he said simply. The words wrapped around her like a slow warmth. Still, part of her hesitated. What if this was just another game for him? That night, he asked her to dance. No music. Just silence and candlelight. She resisted at first, awkward and unsure. But his hand on her waist was gentle, and soon they moved as one. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe this could last. That maybe, just maybe, she wasn't temporary. It happened as softly as a breeze. They were sitting on the couch, close enough to feel the heat between them. He looked at her, really looked, and whispered, "May I?" She didn't answer with words. She leaned forward, her lips meeting his with a hesitation that melted in seconds. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hungry. It was something more terrifying, tender. His fingers rested against her neck, and her hands trembled against his chest. When they pulled apart, neither spoke. It was as if the kiss had said what they couldn't. After she left, he sat in silence, fingers brushing his lips. She walked back to her quarters on legs that felt like air. But the moment the door closed behind her, the fear returned. Not fear of him. Fear of what she had just allowed herself to feel. The next day, Nina caught the eye of one of the senior maids, Elena. A woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper instincts. Elena watched Nina like a hawk, and Nina could feel it in every hallway she walked. She knew someone had noticed. That evening, before Nina even reached the suite, the billionaire met her in the hallway. "Come with me," he said, voice low. He led her to a small study she'd never seen before. "I think people are starting to talk," he said carefully. "Do you want to stop this?" The question was like a dagger. She stared at him for a long time. "Do you?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward and kissed her forehead. "No. I just don't want to ruin your life," he whispered. But they both knew it was already too late for that. Word had spread like smoke through the mansion. Though no one said it directly, Nina could feel the shift in the air, the sideways glances, the whispers behind her back. Elena made a snide remark loud enough for her to hear. "Some people forget where they come from." Nina clenched her jaw but didn't respond. She knew better than to feed fire with words. When she walked into his suite that night, her eyes were clouded with frustration. "I can't keep pretending nothing's going on," she said before he could even speak. He stood, pulled her gently into his arms. "Then don't pretend," he said. "Let them talk. Let them wonder. You're not my secret." His voice was steady, sure, but Nina wasn't. Still, that night she stayed longer than usual. They shared a quiet dinner, talked about books, dreams, and places neither had been. But beneath every word was the tension of a question neither dared ask: what happens next? A week later, he arranged something different. "Don't wear your uniform tonight," he instructed through a small note. When she arrived, she found the suite transformed into a private dining space, candles, soft music, silver cutlery. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, overwhelmed. "Because you deserve to know what it feels like to be treated like more than a maid," he answered. They ate slowly, savoring every bite and every moment. She felt like someone else that night. Not poor. Not invisible. Just seen. After dinner, they danced again. This time, there was music. And when the night ended, he walked her to the door, pressed a kiss to her hand, and said, "You belong wherever you choose to be." The words echoed in her heart long after she left. The mansion buzzed the next day as a new guest arrived, a wealthy socialite rumored to be his ex. She was tall, elegant, and walked like she owned everything she saw. Nina tried to keep her head down, but when the woman walked into the living room and saw her, she smirked. "Still hiring help that stares too long?" Nina pretended not to hear, but it stung. That night, she didn't go to his suite. She stayed in her room, confused, ashamed, and unsure. He came knocking just before midnight. "Why didn't you come?" he asked. "Because I don't want to be compared," she whispered. He reached for her hand and said, "There's no comparison." She let him in, and they didn't speak for a long while. They just sat, shoulder to shoulder, in the dim light. She realized then, this wasn't just an escape for him. It was home. The socialite lingered for days, flirting openly with him. Nina saw it all and said nothing. But one evening, the woman cornered her near the kitchen. "He'll tire of you," she said cruelly. "You're a pretty distraction. But men like him marry their equals." Nina didn't reply. Instead, she went to his suite with trembling hands. "Would you still want me if I had nothing?" she asked. He looked at her, startled. "You think you're the one with nothing?" He pulled her into his arms. "You gave me something I never had. Peace." That night, he told her about his father's cold empire, the pressure, the loneliness. And when he fell asleep with his head on her lap, she realized something terrifying: she wasn't falling for him anymore. She already had. The next morning, Nina didn't show up for work. She left a note and her uniform on the bed. "I need time to think. This isn't goodbye. I just need to remember who I was before I walked into your suite." She took a job at a small diner miles away, sleeping in a shared room and living modestly. Every day, she missed him. But she also needed space to breathe, to understand if her heart belonged to him or to the version of herself she became around him. He didn't chase her. Not immediately. He gave her the one thing she'd always lacked: choice. And that made her miss him even more. He stared at the door every night, hoping she'd walk in. But she didn't. Instead, silence filled his evenings. The suite was colder, the food untouched, the air heavier. For the first time, he realized how much of his life had begun to revolve around her. The socialite left soon after, annoyed by his distant behavior. "You're wasting time on a fantasy," she scoffed. But he knew it wasn't a fantasy. Nina had changed him. He could no longer enjoy the life he once flaunted. On the 21st day, he made a decision. He asked his driver to take him to the diner. He didn't call ahead. He didn't announce himself. He just walked in and hoped she'd still care. She dropped a tray when she saw him. The entire room went silent. He walked up to her slowly, ignoring the stares. "Can I get a coffee?" he asked softly. She blinked back tears and nodded. "On the house," she whispered. They sat at a corner booth like ordinary people. No wealth. No titles. Just two hearts trying to find their rhythm again. "I missed you," he admitted. "I missed me too," she said. "And I think I know who I am now." He reached for her hand. "Then come back. Not as a maid. But as my equal." Her eyes widened. "I can't be your equal." He smiled. "You already are." Nina returned to the mansion, not in a uniform, but in her own clothes, her own style. The staff whispered, but this time, she didn't flinch. She walked to his suite confidently, and he welcomed her like the sun after a storm. He told the staff she was no longer part of the housekeeping team. No explanation. Just fact. Some judged. Some smiled. But none dared question him. Nina knew the gossip would grow, but so would her strength. That night, they didn't just sit. They danced, barefoot in the hallway, to no music at all. And it felt like the beginning of something permanent. His business partners began to notice. At a formal meeting, one leaned over and said, "She's lovely. But is she suitable?" He smiled politely and said, "She's not suitable. She's necessary." Word spread fast. He didn't care. But Nina did. She felt the weight of a world that still saw her as less. "Are you sure you're ready to risk everything?" she asked one evening. He kissed her hand. "You're not a risk. You're the reward." Still, she wondered how long love could last when so many around them waited for it to fail. One evening, she found him sitting alone, staring at his phone. "Everything okay?" she asked. He looked up slowly. "My father's estate, they're not happy with my choices." She sat beside him. "Because of me?" He nodded. "They think I've been distracted. That I've let love get in the way of legacy." She was silent for a moment. "Then maybe they've never known real love." He smiled. "Neither did I. Until you." And with that, he made a promise. "I'll fight whoever I need to. But I won't fight you. Ever." He planned it perfectly: roses, candles, dinner on the rooftop. But when he pulled out the ring, she froze. "I love you," she said softly. "But I need you to know I'm not ready yet. Not for marriage. Not until I'm standing on my own 2 feet." He didn't frown. He didn't sulk. He smiled and put the ring away. "Then I'll wait. As long as it takes." That night, they didn't talk about the future. They just held hands, letting the stars speak. And that, to her, was the truest kind of love. Nina applied to a hospitality school. He offered to pay. She refused. "Let me do this myself," she said. He nodded, pride in his eyes. She juggled classes, side jobs, and their evenings together. Life was hard, but hers. Their relationship changed. Stronger. Deeper. Built on respect and space. And though they spent less time together, every moment they had felt like gold. She was no longer a poor maid in love with a billionaire. She was a woman rewriting her own story. One day, Elena approached her, eyes downcast. "I was wrong about you," she said. "I thought you were using him. But now I see, he's better because of you." Nina didn't gloat. She just nodded. "Thank you." It was the first time she felt truly accepted in the house. And it mattered more than she expected. Not because she needed their approval, but because she'd earned their respect. Even the mansion began to feel like something it never was before: home. She graduated with honors. He was there, in the crowd, clapping louder than anyone. After the ceremony, he kissed her in front of everyone. "You did this. You rose," he whispered. She smiled through happy tears. "I didn't rise alone." That night, he brought the ring out again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She said yes. And it wasn't the ring that made her cry, it was the journey. They moved into a smaller house. She didn't want the mansion. "Let's start fresh," she said. And so they did. A cozy home. A kitchen where they cooked together. A garden she planted herself. He gave up the throne for her. And in return, she gave him a peace he never knew money couldn't buy. Together, they built a life neither had imagined, but both deeply wanted. One day, she visited the mansion where it all began. A new maid was scrubbing the floor. Nina bent down and handed her a glass of water. "It gets easier," she said kindly. As she walked away, she saw her reflection in the glass doors. No longer the scared girl who walked into a suite she wasn't meant to enter. She was now a woman who knew her worth, every bit of it. And the man waiting in the car? He was still hers. Fully. On the balcony of their new home, she leaned against him, eyes closed. "Remember the bathtub?" she whispered. He laughed. "How could I forget? You barged in and never left." She smiled. "You didn't let me." "I never will," he replied, kissing her hair. "You walked in by accident. But you stayed by choice." And that was the story of how a poor maid walked in on the billionaire, and he didn't let her leave. Not because he owned her, but because he loved her. And she chose to stay. Marriage had been blissful, until it wasn't. It started with something small, a forgotten anniversary dinner. "You didn't even remember," Nina said quietly, her voice filled with hurt. He rubbed his forehead. "I'm juggling too much. You know I love you, Nina. But love wasn't always enough." "Sometimes I feel like you're slipping back into that world," she confessed. "The world that almost cost you your soul." He paused, realizing the weight of her words. She wasn't angry because of the missed dinner, she was scared of being forgotten. They didn't speak for hours. But by night, he slipped into bed, held her tightly, and whispered, "Thank you for pulling me back. Don't stop." And just like that, they learned even the strongest love needs constant tending. One morning, a luxury hotel chain reached out to Nina. They wanted her to manage a branch. "We've watched your progress, your education, your growth," the email read. She stared at the screen, frozen. She was no longer the girl cleaning floors, she was the woman now being called to lead. He was proud, of course. But there was fear in his eyes. "The job is in another city," she said gently. He nodded. "If it's your dream, I'll follow you. Or I'll wait here. Either way, I'm with you." It was a defining moment. She chose the job. Not out of ambition, but because she needed to prove something to herself. She could rise, not because of him, but alongside him. And he, without hesitation, packed his bags and followed. The new city was different. No one knew her past. To her team, she wasn't the maid who married a billionaire. She was their leader, firm, fair, and inspiring. She trained them with empathy, ran the hotel with grace, and brought in record profits within months. At night, she came home to the same man who once waited for her in a hotel suite. "You know," he teased one night as he folded laundry, "I married a powerhouse." She laughed. "And I married a man who lets me be one." Their home was modest, their love rich. And in that simplicity, they found what luxury never gave them, freedom to be real. On a rainy Saturday, there was a knock at the door. Nina opened it to find her mother, the same woman who once told her not to dream too big. She looked older, softer, and held a small suitcase. "I heard about your life now, and I'm proud." Nina was stunned. Her mother stepped inside, awkward at first. Over tea, They talked like they hadn't in years. Her mother finally said, "I was wrong. I thought survival was more important than dreams. But you proved both are possible." They embraced, and for the first time in her life, Nina felt seen by the woman who raised her. Not just as a wife or a success, but as a daughter who had finally come home. Months later, she was invited to give a talk at a women's conference. As she stood on stage, she looked out at the crowd and began, "I walked into a hotel suite by mistake. I thought I was just a maid cleaning a bathtub. But I was actually stepping into my own story." She shared her journey, the hard choices, the love, the fight to keep her identity. The crowd sat in silence, hanging on to every word. "You don't need someone rich to give you worth," she said. "But if you ever find someone who sees your value before you even know it's there, hold on to them." When she walked off stage, he was waiting with open arms. "Still my queen," he said, smiling. And she whispered back, "Always your maid, with a crown I earned."